Oh, for God's sake.
Why won't you believe me?
Because I'm sane, Mrs. Barkley. Sane and rational.
No one believes the truth. Or lives to tell it. There's nothing nice about murder.
Child's Play is the original film in the Child's Play franchise that started the Chucky series off. The movie is directed by Tom Holland, who you know in Fright Night. He wrote and directed the original 1984 film Fright Night. And he co-wrote the film with Don Mancini and John LaFia. And the movie stars, of course, Catherine Hicks, Chris Sarandon, who also starred in Fright Night, which Holland directed, Alex Vincent, who plays the young child protagonist in the movie, and of course, how can we not forget Brad Dourif, who is the physical and voice of Chucky. The movie is essentially about a mother who gives her son a toy for Christmas. She wants this doll that is kind of inspired by the Cabbage Patch Kids, like, you know, the Cabbage Patch dolls that were like selling hotcakes. It's kind of like that. Like, the good guy dolls are like these hot toy items, and they're basically selling out, and so she wants to get her child one of those because he really wants one. And so apparently she gets him one from, like, you know, a peddler, and it turns out the doll is possessed by the soul of a serial killer named Charles Lee Ray, who's named aka Chucky. And so the doll basically wants to put his soul. He wants to be human again, so he tries to put his soul into the little boy and become human again. And before that, though, he goes around and starts killing people to get revenge on all those who did this to him and made him go into the doll. The movie itself, I really enjoy. And the movie kind of has like a POV type thing where you don't know if it's the child. They kind of play with the idea of whether it's the child. You don't know if it's the child killing or if it's the doll that's killing, because it's kind of like one of those, like, oh, maybe it is the child, maybe the doll's not, it's just the child faking like it's the doll. And so it kind of builds that tension on you, but at the same time you kind of know it's the doll because we've all seen Chucky, so you know it's the doll. And so, but if you've never seen the movie before, you would assume, like, oh, maybe this is the child that's doing this, you know, because it's called Child's Play, you know. And they're in this movie. This movie is essentially like, you know, this was the first movie, and so it plays off like that. And this was the first movie to use animatronic doll. And so what they did was, this movie had to go through lots of process. They would have to reshoot footage over because sometimes the doll would malfunction. It would start walking, and all of a sudden it would break down. So then what they would do is they hired a little guy, and they put a Chucky costume on him. And then sometimes you might see the doll jump through, like, for instance, there's 3 scenes I know of that is a little person in a Chucky costume. And what it is they would put him in a Chucky mask, like when he jumps down through the fireplace, that's a little person in a Chucky costume. Or the fact that when the doll is coming at Andy with a knife, that is also a little person. And then there's one more scene, I think it's the scene where he runs by the mom and you see him in the background, that's also a little person. Which, what it is the guy who played Howard the Duck in the Howard the Duck live action movie was the little guy that they put in the Chucky costume to play Chucky. And I will say, though, the movie works. Like, and the animatronic stuff looks really good. And, like, you know, and this was 1988. They didn't really have this technology. You know, like, you know, nowadays they can just CGI it, or they can do it much better now. But back then they really had to work. And it was Kevin Yeager who did, like, the original Child's Play series, the original Child's Play trilogy. And he basically, which he would then go and fall in love with Catherine Hicks, and they would marry. And so I guess they fell in love on the set of this movie. And so this is basically, it was long, like, there's a whole behind the scenes of how they brought Chucky to life with the animatronic stuff. And originally the script is from a story by Don Mancini. Don Mancini, you now know, of course, as the director of the Chucky series now, because he's directing the upcoming Chucky series on the Sci-Fi Channel. He also directed the last couple of Chucky movies. He wrote the entire movie series. Like, he co-wrote this movie, because this movie, what happened was, he wrote a draft of this movie. Like, originally, like, his draft was a lot different from this story. Like, originally it was like Chucky was, yes, a doll, but at the same time, the doll was more like, you know, like, it was a blood bond. It really wasn't a serial killer trapped in a doll's body. It was a blood bond between like the boy and the doll would go and kill people for the boy that angered the boy, like a bully or something. He'd go kill the bully. And so they kind of did that, but then when the studio got it and wanted to make it, MGM was like, we really don't like this. United Artists and stuff like, we don't like this. And so when John LaFia come in, he did rewrites of the script and stuff, and basically tried to make it more about like a cops movie with like a serial killer doll. And Tom Holland did a pass by the script where it became this movie. And so there was some stuff that was cut from the movie originally. Like originally, there was like at the beginning of the movie, if you watch, okay, the movie was 2 hours originally. Like the movie was 2 hours long, but they had to cut it down because they did a test screen, and the test screen got negative. It was a bad test screening. And so what they would do is they had to cut the movie down because they're like, okay, we got to cut this movie down because people hated it. And so what it was originally, Brad Dourif, who is the voice of Chucky, now we all love as Chucky, he was not the voice originally. Only he played the human part. He was only paid to play the human part because I guess they thought he wasn't famous enough to voice Chucky. They're like, we'll get a famous person or we'll get someone else to voice Chucky because we don't want you voicing Chucky. So they got someone else, a woman named Jessica Walters. If you may know her as the mom from Arrested Development, who's now, rest in peace, she's gone now. And I will say that they did the test screening and people hated her voice, unfortunately. And, you know, like they said, it was just the studio figured it was just too menacing. You know, and so, which I thought that's ridiculous. So then they just go back to their original and say, hey, you know, Brad, how would you like to come in and voice the doll as well as play the doll? And they're like, okay, yeah, because, I mean, he gets paid extra, so it's like, yeah. And then he would go on to voice the doll in the entire movie and the upcoming series. So, I mean, good for Brad Dourif, you know? And so, that's really great about that, and I really like that. And so, what it is so Brad Dourif, okay, alright, so Brad Dourif, that was one thing that they had to fix. And another thing was they had to trim the movie down. So, originally, they did not, like, there was a scene where, like, the cop, you know, played by Chris Sarandon, Mike, he was dressed like a woman, and so Chucky, Brad Dourif was going to stalk her and was going to try to kill her, but then he turns like, freeze, police, and everything. He realizes it's a setup, and then he runs away, and then he starts taking off all his dresses and everything, and you actually see parts of that at the beginning of the movie if you watch, where it's like at the opening credits where you see him throw his skirt down and you see him still has the scarf on his neck. And so I'm like, oh, I did not realize that. You can still see clips of it, like as Chucky's running after the setup, you just see that he's just throwing like the dress and stuff down. And I'm like, that's cool. You know, they cut that out though because of timing and everything. And another thing was you would see is Chucky, okay, like there's a scene where, like, you know, Chucky's asking, where he's showing Chucky his room, but you don't see that scene because he just cuts back to the aunt at the beginning of the movie. And he's showing Chucky's room, he shows him, like, and he shows a picture of his deceased father, and you don't see that scene. That was cut from the movie. Another scene was cut was when he goes to the mental hospital, and he goes there, and Chucky's trying to get in, and so basically he can't get in, so he goes down to, like, finds a girl that has, you know, mental illness, and basically tricks her into letting him in, and then he says, and talks her into carrying him up the stairs to where Chucky is. But I don't know if that scene was reshot or recut. I think what it was this was the shot, but I think he somehow got through in the, you know, but that, I don't know if it was reshot or if it was recut differently. I think it was recut differently, but that was a scene that was in the movie. You see Chucky go up to the basement, you see him climb up to the window, and then you see Andy run out. So I don't know if it was reshot or recut, but I know that it was not. That's not the shot that was in the movie. I mean, I don't know. I'm saying that's probably what it was, because I know that I'm like, so I was sitting there thinking about it after I was thinking like, I just read this, and I'm like, but he's going through you've seen him walk up. I don't know. I'm just saying, they probably reshot that scene, or they probably recut it, or maybe I just mispronounced it. Maybe he actually walked up, because I don't think you see him get inside the room. I think maybe he went to a little girl's room, she let him in, then he, you know, so, you know, that's probably what happened. But I know that's what a little girl with mental illness actually carries him around in that scene, but they cut that scene completely down to where you just see him run to the doctor, and a doctor trying to give him shock treatment, and Chucky give the doctor shock treatment. And another thing that was cut was, originally the fire, like, it was going to be much more intense. The final act was Andy actually, you know, gets like medieval on Chucky, kind of. Like, he actually gets he gets a skateboard like with a knife and rolls it at Chucky and stabs Chucky, and like he gets some kind of poison and sprays it in Chucky's eyes. And there was like, and then also like, you know, that scene, the scene at the end with Chucky was cut down because it was too graphic, but like Chucky was originally supposed to still come back. And like what it was Chucky was gonna, after he grabs the one police officer by the neck and then he gets shot more, originally the cops were gonna come in and then Chucky was still gonna be alive, and there was gonna be a tussle with the cops until finally the cops shoot him dead, and then they put his bag in the evidence locker at the police precinct, and then you just see his hand still up, and a fly swings by and he swats this fly, and then basically implying that he's still alive, the soul's still alive. And so basically, but they cut that scene completely down because of the gruesomeness of it, so they're just like, which is stupid. I don't know if it's on the Blu-ray or not, which I hope it is, because I'm going to go check that out later, but that's what I saw. Like, I was reading about this online, I'm like, oh, these scenes were all cut down. Like, this would have been much better. The movie would have been 2 hours, but I mean, I really enjoyed the movie, but the movie would have been much better if that was scenes where it really does. And I really like the movie, the idea of, like, it's a POV. You don't know if it's the doll or not, but because by the time you get to the sequels, you know it's the doll. But when you watch the first movie, you don't know if it's like, oh my god, is the boy doing this? Or if is he or not? And, you know, there was so many ideas about, like, what if it's electronic killer? Like, originally, it was a pitch about what if Chucky was an electronic robot voice. But then they decided against it, which later they would use that in the remake of Child's Play, ironically. And so there was so many ideas that were just cut out that, so I guess, would be later used for the remake. And I will say, the movie itself I really enjoy it. What I really like about the movie is I like how you see this dynamic about a mother and a father story, a mother and a son story, not a mother-father story, a mother and a son story, about how a boy, you know, really wants something. A mom goes that way to get that story, and she believes her son no matter what. You know, she kind of at first is skeptic, but then she kind of relieves the son. And then that shocking moment when batteries drop out, and then you see that she 100% believes him. Like, first she starts to believe him. He's like, oh, Chucky did. And they're going to lock her up. And she's like, you know, maybe he is. But then when she pulls the button and then he doesn't, like, say nothing. And then she starts laughing. And then, like, she goes to pick up the box and the batteries fall out. Then she opens up the thing. You know, it gets creepy because you're like, oh, my God, he is real. And then, like, it gets me every time, the scene where, you know, when she's about to go throw him in the fireplace, he comes to life, and he's like, you fucking bitch! Ah! Ah! You know, like, always, but now you kind of can tell because you're like, you can see that they use a different puppet for that scene. You know, like, you could see, like, it was just like, you know, it looked like a doll, and they have angry Chucky voice. Like, he's, like, angry. You can see, okay, it's going to come to life now because it's a different puppet. You know, but back then you didn't know that. You're just thinking, oh my God, it's alive. And it's such a fun time to watch. I mean, if you've never seen the movie, it's a fun movie. There's plenty of sequels. Some of the sequels are not really good, and some sequels are good. I really enjoy this movie. I recommend it to you. If I had to give this movie a grade, I would give it a solid B+.
Nothing nice about murder. And there's nothing innocent about child's play.